lowering the boat into say, uh, a hinter stream of the Methodos, um, and pulling farther out than usual towards some extreme formal determinations. I think that it can be shown that we have a collapse of cogency in these extreme Zizekian positions so far as they push uh, into a den of Marxist howlers, wolves. Uh, if we begin from a kind of, not from Marx, let's say, but from John Stuart Mill, but Marx is trying to achieve liberty. Mill merely states what liberty is with somewhat greater candor. So if we regard liberty as being free from the manipulations of a monarch, a king, and so on, but only granting that which uh, we're no longer red-faced because the apron strings are strangling us, of Kant's figure who hasn't imagined the semper aud, the daring to be free. We would then go in the direction of an autonomy which did not have its center, smita, which wasn't in the midst of a moral discussion per se, but which rather emerged in some kind of aleatory fashion or Nietzschean fashion, so that everything was just forms and more forms and more forms. So that when we would see John Stuart Mill say that liberty is this freedom from the monarch, as we were just saying, what we would say to ourselves is, but what isn't liberty just an arbitrary form that somebody has dreamt up and become addicted to and believed to be an explanation simply because they're so used to whispering it to themselves? That if they can understand any matter in its terms, they consider it totally understood. So liberty as freedom from a monarch is liberty against coercions by a government in the American formation, an American formula of that. But what does this really mean? So I think the formalization I see here is that, first of all, if you make no distinction between that which stems from a human will and that which simply happens, then, and this cuts into the Hayek position, which I consider Hayek a very strong thinker. So in finding flaw with his thinking, I do something I consider to be grave. But I think there is a flaw in it Because once we no longer make this distinction between things which for a human being we can't consider know for sure what the consequences are. So this is Hayek's notion of a law proper, which he claims that Americans don't understand, which is that I have a principle, and what I'm concerned with is the principle. I'm not concerned with the consequence. This is like that somebody would say, we're not really human beings. Our human dignity is destroyed if we do X. If we, even though our life is in jeopardy and we're freezing, we shouldn't become cannibals, like that flight South America that crashed so unfortunately some years ago. But so far as we don't make any claim that the human being can posit a principle in a way that isn't subject to the simple standard of what results, so far as there's no gamble like that involved, then it seems formally the same whether the actions of some uh, Louis the 14th or whatnot, some state, some government should cause me to be compel me to do certain things, or whether my own so-called subjective character, my character qualities, under the conditions of um, simple rule of law rather than rule of a monarch with uh, the supposed fault of a monarch, which is that his acts are unforeseeable. In a legal state, we should be able to foresee what the law would do so we can predict in advance the results of our action. So, in other words, the removal of arbitrariness. But if we regard everything on the side of this blind dwarf or the Zizekian side, then all that would matter would be the utility. So, true, Zizek often makes comments along the lines of being in favor of some form of Kantian elevation of the durability of a kind of personal autonomy. And he makes comments like that in other spheres along the lines of that we should take seriously people's notion of what makes them a human and what doesn't make them a human, in contradistinction to the notion of sheer compulsion out of the course of events, so that the case for historical disadvantage is very strong, and then society is compelled to treat people as defective in a certain sense on the basis of their histories. If you regard no difference between the purely human principles and the causal relation, then what it means is that there's no reason to care that it's the arbitrary decision of a monarch, in contradistinction to simply how the principles currently in power in the society affect various subjectivities, characters, people with different character qualities, different proclivities, different predilections, however you want to put it. The effect of the state of affairs, which is described as a social contract state with a minimal government, is no different from the what flows from the worst tyrant, so far as it equates with the outcome. So if you're only looking at the outcome, then the cause makes no difference. And if you regard there to be no cardinal difference between humans and what they cause to happen, and um, superstructures, just to say the whole of human society, which is in some way independent from any given human decision, and what they cause, then this notion of liberty in the liberal sense becomes meaningless, because it's all it says is that it just says the same thing as that you're calling liberty form 2, you're calling tyranny form 1, but what really matters is the particulars of your outcome. Um, so everything streams into a kind of obliteration from the point of view, if you allow that human causes and what humans can predict um, to be no different from the blind forces. So, for example, you could think of somebody exercising, for instance. So, because of the way their subjectivity is, they go to the 24-hour fitness all the time and they exercise a great deal. And one says that's their free choice, but they live in a society where being, let's say, slim and trim is valued, and it gives you a certain amount of power to look a certain way, right? So you could say for certain character types, which may be a large proportion of the population, this action, which appears subjective, is actually compelled. So it's compelled. So just make the distinction. So just make the mental picture that suppose there was an institution like drafting one into the army, and then you would be drafted into the army, and then you'd be compelled to go to 24-hour fitness. So it's just as much a tyranny, but it's just through um, a different mechanism. But this only holds so far as we don't regard there to be a cardinal difference between the human being and between all other causation.